I'm going to make you the spotlight.
Okay.
Okay, I'm kind of like getting into, I'll make you the spotlight after in 1 minute. First of all, I just want to say hello, everyone. Okay, now, Julian, I don't know how often you use Zoom, but there's all different settings. You know, sometimes you see people who only turn on video, sometimes you only see people, it depends on what your settings are. At the moment, we've got 15 people here. And I think a lot more people want to hear this. It's a very interesting topic. I've got already people telling me that they want to hear more about it. Please record, etc., etc. So this is sustainability in the oceans is actually obviously a big topic. So I'll start now. So Judian Brooke, who I'm about to make the spotlight, he'll do his own introduction. He told me that he is a fisheries consultant. The way that this will work is I have 10 questions that I have to ask him, which he believes were good questions. I don't know if that's just because I'm a rabbi and he's trying to be nice to me, but he thought that they were good questions. And I'll start off with those, but at the end, I'll leave some time for anyone else who wants to ask questions. So just feel free if there is that time. And Julian, I'm gonna make you the spotlight. And then you can, unmute yourself. I just want to see there you are, Judian Brooke. Your name is there. Spotlight video. Okay, go for it. All you.
Okay. So you mentioned asking for a sort of a brief CV kind of introduction thing.
Yeah.
A bit of background. Okay. So the most important part would probably start where I used to sneak out of the house and go fishing on the Cork Bay Chuckies when I was about 15 years old. That's when the slow descent began. Then after school, I did BA, LLB, and a specialization in a marine law master's. Then I did my law articles. Then I went to a specialist fisheries or marine law firm called Dawson Edwards. Then I went off and practiced for my own account. Then I realized that I really hated law. And I sort of turned more to fisheries policy and the sort of the wider issues surrounding fisheries and the way the law governs it. And obviously my hobbies include fishing and spear fishing and cooking fish. No, and I stay in Marine de Gama and with my wife and 2 children, and that's me.
Great. Well, whoever doesn't know Julian, so first of all, Julian, can I just ask you, can you maybe just step a little bit back from the camera, because you're very close to the camera. If you can just maybe move a little bit. There we go. That's better. Okay. And I think that we'll start off. I know how much you know about the subject. Not everybody knows. But I'm just going to ask you, try to stick to maybe 3 to 4 minutes each question, and because I know that you can go on forever about each one. Okay. So the first question, I think, is a very valid question. What is the most humane way, if there is such a thing, to kill a fish? In Judaism, we say that, when it comes to shchita, killing cows, there are certain ways to do it. When it comes to fish in Judaism, as far as I know, there is no particular way that the rabbi said you should kill fish. So that's why I'm asking you, from your perspective, what is that way?
Yeah, I always start off by telling people that fish are very bad at feeding pain. They aren't. It wouldn't really be a great advantage if you felt a lot of pain and your entire existence consisted of eating crabs and stingrays and crunching through shellfish. So they're not good at feeding pain, and just in terms of the way they're equipped to deal with pain. Having said that, there's no need to make anything, obviously they experience negative stimuli, and there's no reason to make anything suffer. So there is a technique that the Japanese use called ikejime, and it involves basically inserting a spike into the fish's brain, and there's 2 brains, a forebrain and a hindbrain, and you spike the brain, and then they would quickly, similar to shchita, they would nick the blood vessels in the gills, and then in a very extreme example, they'd even run a little wire through the fish's spine or the spinal nerves to destroy the nerves completely. So it stops the fish suffering and flapping around, but it also improves the quality of the fish. So any sashimi grade fish will have to have this process done. You know, it allows the blood to leave the body, which carries the sort of all the bacteria, and also stops the enzymes which would cause deterioration in the fish's tissue. So yeah, there is a more compassionate way of dealing with the fish, and it's good for it contributes to eating the fish as well.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because I've been in many countries, including South Africa in the garden route, where I've seen fishermen take that fish out and they just dunk it over their head on the rock until the thing stops moving. And, you know, I wish they knew that there are those benefits of actually keeping the freshness of the fish in a certain way, as well as killing it as quick as possible. And maybe that's something that, you know, people should teach more and educate, because no one, I'd never heard of this word called, you know, this Japanese word of, what's it called again?
Ikejime.
EKG. EKG.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I mean, that's,
well, just
you know,
one quick thought.
Yeah.
I arranged, I have tried to help line fishermen in Strathspey. I arranged to get a sushi chef to come and meet them at the harbor, for them to bring the fish back live, and for him to do the whole process, and then to prepare sashimi for them in the little house in what's it called, Kasispai, at the back of Strathspey. And they were amazed that the taste of raw fish prepared properly is not fishy. It's biltongy would be the way to describe it. Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, interesting. I mean, that's something that everyone should look at. Again, I try to watch a video of that you sent me, and I did watch it. I mean, it's never nice to see an animal transpire, but at the same time, if one's going to eat it, of course one should do it in the most humane way. That just sounds the right moral thing to do. And I'm glad that you taught us that. And I'm glad the Japanese taught that to you. You know, whoever knowledge is shared. Number 2, sustainability. Are fish in trouble? You know, both in South Africa and around the world. You know, there's more people on Earth. They estimate 10 billion people. You know, how are there going to be enough fish for all of us?
So that it's a very difficult question, because the problem statement of are fish in trouble is very wide, and there are certain areas and certain species which are in much greater trouble, and some that are less so. So just very briefly, in South Africa, we're actually doing a good job of getting many of our fish stocks to recover after terrible onslaught. So yellowtail is coming back nicely, snook is coming back nicely. There are hake even is coming back nicely. So there are species that are showing very good signs of recovery. Others obviously not so much, and the high value ones like palamun and crayfish are just too valuable to sort of be ignored by criminal syndicates. But that's a whole other story. But there were terrible scares a while back that people would have heard there'll be no fish by 2048. Everyone must have heard that. Now, it's complete nonsense, and it was based on how certain scientists had done their modeling. It's way too complex to go into, but if you are interested, there's the worm-hillborn debate that looks at whether or not we're going to have fish after 2048, and we will.
Okay, and I mean, you mentioned yesterday, 1982, the UN came out with the law of the ocean.
Okay. Okay, so yeah.
How much are those in control, especially with regards to China?
Okay, so there have been a number of steps from when the seas were completely open. We start at the beginning. There was a huge industrialization in commercial fishing after the war. You had development in technology. Sonar became available. People could track fish more effectively. Synthetic ropes, nylon became available, and diesel-powered engines became available. So there was this huge mechanization, and that was coupled with almost a total absence of controls. So you had these powerful fleets that were able to travel to distant waters and exploit fish stocks very effectively. And there was no real recognition of the rights of a coastal state to sort of protect and control the water adjoining its territory. And so you had, for example, in South Africa, we had the Russian trawl fleet here. And I remember seeing a map of South Africa in Russian with all the trawl grounds marked in Russian. But there became more and more recognition of the rights of coastal states to protect and to enforce their laws, or the fishery laws, in their adjoining waters. And that culminated in 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And that said everyone's entitled to this exclusive economic zone adjoining their territory, and they can control it and patrol it, and you need the authorization of the coastal state to fish in that area. And that obviously there were other areas in the high seas, and I'll come to that shortly, but that allowed for a greater protection of inshore resources. Before, people only really recognized 12 nautical miles, and a nautical mile is about 1.9 kilometers. So there's this huge band of protection, and people also turned to look at to increase protection on the high seas as well, particularly where there's shared stocks. So, for example, all the world's tunas are controlled by agreements between the countries that fish them and the countries in whose waters they occur, and they regulate how tunas can be caught and sold.
Okay.
So that offers a huge amount of protection.
Yes. And the one thing that you did mention, just on that note, you mentioned that the country Mongolia has rights to some seas, which is it's an inland country. How does an inland country have access to the ocean?
So that turns on how fishing vessel owners try to get around all these controls by ordinarily a fishing boat is controlled by the law of the country where it's registered. So obviously a South African ship is as much a part of South Africa as the ground under your feet. But then a lot of countries not so scrupulous would basically create their own shipping register. And Mongolia is the example. I mean, you had places like Belize, Cook Islands, Vanuatu, Niue. Now, the enforcement in Niue is not as great as one would imagine. So that obviously has a number of challenges. One, who's enforcing the fishing regime, the fishing regulations on the Mongolian or Niue's or Vanuatu registered vessel? And there are other concerns, crew employment. In other words, on a South African fishing vessel, you're entitled to be treated according to South African employment law. What happens under Mongolian employment law, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys. Okay, I'm just gonna mute everyone, but just unmute yourself, Julian. Unmute yourself. Okay, just want to make sure that we can hear you, but other people know. Okay, Ilana, welcome. Where we are now on the 5th day of creation, talking about the 5th day of creation, the birds and all the sea creatures, as well as we asked Julian to share with us some of his experience as a consultant of fisheries. We've gone through already some sustainable stuff about fishing, as well as the most humane way to kill a fish, whoever's just arrived. We're on to the next one, and this is a little bit where Judaism is unsure. The Jewish law in the Torah is that if a fish has fins and scales, it is kosher, and if it doesn't, it's not kosher, and that excludes octopus and prawns and all the bottom feeders. In general, we haven't really known why Jews aren't allowed to eat these things as much as many of us would love to. I'd like to know, Julian, from your perspective, is there any biological basis or ecological basis for not eating squid and bottom feeders other than fish?
It's such a difficult one. My personal theory is that there's no. It's completely a hook. It just has no basis in anything scientific or rational. So the examples of again in my army dodging BA anthropology days, we looked at the idea of structural functionalism, that society develops its laws in a sort of an ecosystem, almost in the evolutionary sense, that it develops them as a response to its ecosystem. And if you judge the laws of kashrut and you say, well, prawns confer an advantage on the people who avoid them because they don't get whatever shellfish poisoning or develop allergies. But then you have to test that against other similar environments. So you say, okay, the Middle East is arid and it's hot, and the shellfish will decompose quickly. But the example I always give is the west coast of South America is incredibly hot and arid, and the people thrive on shellfish. And the other thing I always turn to is that the exclusion of prawns is, or shellfish, is only one of a suite of other things which make absolutely no sense. So the exclusion of ostrich, which is always considered a superfood. It's low in fat, and it's so to me it makes no biological sense, and I can't see it. And particularly in other areas, the sort of the reasons given of being unhealthy, they're overcome by drying and other things. So I don't get it. For me, I vote hawk all the way.
You vote hawk, and the reason I'm saying that is because we discussed a little bit that Maimonides says that there are health benefits in not eating shellfish, and the book that you sent me, I'm just going to quote it, called "Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches: The Riddles of Culture" by Marvin Harris. We both looked at that, and it was interesting how, Judaism in general, if you had to go ask your average religious Jew in Jerusalem, what's the reasons for the law of kashrut? They're not going to say it's for health. They're going to say there's no reason. It's just a discipline that Hashem wanted for us. Maimonides is the one who introduced maybe it's for health reasons. Marvin Harris says maybe it's for ecological reasons. And those are, the Jews were in the desert, and it would have been bad for the desert where they're eating all these things. But bottom line is, I appreciate your opinion, and that you have the same opinion as those religious Jews in Meir Sharim. Okay, so that's good. Number 4,
So just a quick one, just briefly, Rambam might have been working in a particular medical model. If he was still using Galen's humors of blood bile, choler, and phlegm, whatever it is, then he might have seen, the same reason that he might have said that certain cheeses are bad for you. Because of the effect on the humors of the body. So, and he also, if he was in Egypt, maybe there was a local issue with some of that's another possibility, but I can't see beyond it.
Okay, well, so that's that. I'll just have to be okay with never tasting squid and stuff. That's okay. I have no willingness to eat it, but some people do. Okay, number 4, fish blood. So the Torah has many laws that you shouldn't eat blood of an animal. Matter of fact, it says when you kill a cow or goat or anything like that, you actually have to bury its blood. That's how much we have to care about blood. There's a whole salting process when it comes to kosher meats to try to get out the blood. Whereas when it comes to fish, just cut the fish open and eat it. No getting rid of the blood. So, I guess the question is tell us a little bit about fish blood. Is there a lot of blood? Is it different to animals? What could the reasons be different that the Torah distinguishes?
Okay, so I'm not a biologist, but I've opened a lot of fish, and I've cleaned a lot of fish. So when you work with a fish, it doesn't bleed. There's very little blood distributed through the body, or visible blood. So if I was to take a fish without damaging its gills and fillet it, I would encounter no blood at all. It just wouldn't appear. And the blood is similar. Technically, it's red, but it is a type of hemoglobin. There are different types of hemoglobin, apparently. I don't know enough about it. But remember, with ikejime, you have to go to a lot of effort to get the blood out of the fish, and that would involve nicking the very blood-rich gills, the top of the gill arch, and even chopping off the base of the tail to expose, the other end of the circulatory system. So there's very little free-flowing blood when you work with fish.
Okay, so that's maybe why the Torah doesn't speak about it when it comes to fish. It's just either not a lot or it's not free-flowing, as you said. Okay, so that's interesting. A more global thing, nothing to do with Judaism, even though everything to do with Judaism. What is the worst thing at the moment that's happening to fish? Is it global warming? Is it plastics in the ocean? You mentioned something called ghost fishing, poaching. Tell us a little bit about what you counted and what's the worst in your opinion.
Okay. I don't know enough about global warming. A lot of the discussion that people have in the industry is that fish have been through a lot worse than global warming. So it is likely to influence things in terms of the way currents behave. But sharks have been through ice ages, and other fish have been through plenty of ice ages as well. They're millions of years old. There's no so whatever adaptation they went through to survive the previous enormous changes, I'm guessing that they will do this. That a certain amount of those species will do the same. The plastic pollution, I don't think we know enough yet. There are more and more studies about the appearance of plastics. Actually, a recent one on plastic microfibers in pilchards and sardines and small top feeders, and they do occur because remember all these little sardines and anchovies and mackerel are all filter feeders that swim along with their gill arches out, and they filter out all the little either phytoplankton or zooplankton. So if microfibers occur in that planktonic soup, then they're likely to ingest them. The question is, are the plastic fibers sufficiently stable that the fish can ingest them and pass them out without too much, without affecting anything? I don't know enough about that. I think that will take a lot longer to work out. And I'd imagine that overall, plastic in one's food is not a good thing, but I don't know how it compares with all the other things that occur inside, in a fish's makeup. Ghost fishing is a terrible thing, and it's something so just a brief definition. A lot of fishing gear is what we call passive gear. You bait a trap, you throw it in the water, and the fish is attracted by the bait, and it swims in and is trapped. But if you lose or you discard, or it's called abandoned, lost, and discarded gear, if you don't pick up that gear, then it will continue fishing long after you leave it. The bait might be eaten, but the dead fish trapped inside will attract more fish, and they will die, and so the cycle continues. So in the industry, we get around that they get around it by adding very readily biodegradable weak points in the gear. So, for example, in a trap, everything would be done in incredibly resilient and sort of polypropylene rope that will last 1,000 years, but the last few bits would be done in a cotton twine, and it's an expense. And every so often you're going to have to replace it, but at least the gear will stop fishing within a couple of days after the cotton perishes. Similarly, basically overfishing still and what we call illegal, unregulated, and unrecorded fishing is probably the biggest problem, and that's what we call the IUU. It's the fishing that goes on illegally, unreported, and unrecorded, because nobody knows how much mortality there is. Nobody knows how much fish are being taken out of the ecosystem, and therefore scientists can't make a proper determination of what's really dying and how much is available to be caught. So there's a greater attention on ghost fishing, but there's still a heightened focus on these unregulated fishes, and we have, but there are more and more mechanisms to control that as well. Should I go into that as well?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you wish. Okay. Go for it.
So the ways of ordinarily, you catch your fish and you offload it and you get the best possible price. But there's a growing movement towards shutting down available markets. So you're going to struggle to import fish caught on a Mongolian or flagged vessel into the EU or into America. The East is a bit more flexible, not so much Japan, Korea, but China, you can probably get it in. There's also, so that's controlling the market. The other part is controlling the ports that they rely on. So if you want to go and fish illegally, you're still going to need infrastructure to maintain your crew, or to replace your crew, or to undergo repairs. And so you have to put into a port. And so coastal ports are becoming more and more active in what's called port state control. So you put into our port, we want to know what you have on board, what gear, what catch you have on board, and then that includes things like safety and crew welfare. Are all there's a far greater focus, on the available ports. And then when it comes to sharing out the catch itself, I mean, so for example, not a lot of people know, but we catch bluefin tuna in South Africa. Not a lot, but we catch. And it's controlled by a convention called the Convention on the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tunas, based in Hobart in Tasmania. And every little southern bluefin that we catch has to have a little barcode tag, otherwise it can't leave the country, and customs will stop it. I mean, I know people have a poor image of law enforcement in South Africa, but trust me, it can be, it's actually quite rigorous. So those are, to me, those are the two bigger challenges. Just if I can just go on, there's a huge, I mean, a lot of the NGOs put a lot of effort into sort of demonizing and vilifying the fishing industry. It's good for business, but the guys that I know actually do a lot. They, for example, in the tuna longline, seabirds, albatross and petrels will become entangled in the hooks, and the industry solved the problem. I mean, the specialists from University of Washington, if you're interested in looking up more, it's a Professor Ed Melvin, M-E-L-V-I-N, and he's a specialist and we worked out a way to weight the line so that it falls quickly through the water column and the birds can't get at it. Again, it was the industry, South African industry. It wasn't BirdLife, it wasn't WWF, it was the industry that did that.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so that is fascinating. A little bit, you know, changing the topic, even though that's the most important, you know, in terms of ghost fishing and overfishing, and that's big scale. Yeah. But more on a biological scale, do fish themselves produce their same species as babies when they lay eggs? Do the babies look and resemble exactly the parents? Or is there some type of evolution of fish, of, you know, mutations, etc. out there? What are we eating?
Okay, so fish species are fairly old and fairly stable, but there are, one of the effects of previous very heavy fishing pressure on things like cob is that there should be far greater populations of silver cob and dusky cob, and they're closely related, but they usually form these breeding aggregations, and there's plenty for everyone to mingle with. But as the, and again, cob are dependent to a degree on estuaries to complete their life cycle. So as more and more water is abstracted for farming, and estuaries become less silted up and less available for that, the theory that they've started to sort of find comfort in the arms of another, and they've all headed off to, and there are examples of hybridization. They don't know the extent of it, but it has occurred.
Tell us about kabeljau, the hybridization of kabeljau. What's that?
Yes, but again, it's highly. The only other example might be, and I don't know, but where you cut through land masses at Suez and at Panama, there might be some movement, but I don't know enough about that. But
well, what is hybrid? What is this hybridization? Give us a concrete example.
It's where two ordinarily. Well, the examples, when you put a pilot whale and a dolphin in the same aquarium, you're going to end up with a wolphin. Or if you put a zebra and a donkey, you're going to get a zonkey. Yeah. Okay. So if the theory is, if you limit the number of available reproductive partners of a kabeljau, and they're more likely, the breeding aggregations become weaker, then they're more likely to encounter a member of the other species. And there's something about one of the cob species that they're attracted to drumming. They have these enormous swim bladders that they're able to stridulate, I can't remember the word is, but they make this drumming sound. And one of the old fishermen that I worked with, they used to put a knife into the timbers of the boat underwater, and then they put their ear to it and listen to the kabeljau drumming away. And that drumming is involved in the reproductive cycle, in the mating cycle. And it's possible that with fewer of one type of drumming, they might be drawn to another type of drumming. But that's I don't know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So there could be, you know, some kabeljau's going there, getting interested in other type of kabeljaus, and we eating the offspring. Okay.
Yeah, you know, as I mentioned yesterday, you know, since you are the rabbi of the Muizenberg and Kalk Bay Hebrew congregation, on the Kalk Bay Chukkies, they're convinced convinced that a certain type of sea bream is the sort of love child of a hottie and a steenkie. It's not. It's a completely independent species, but it looks like they call it a bastard key. They say it's like I say, the love child of the two.
I was going to say we should eat that on Tu B'Av, which is like Jewish Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, next question, also very different. And if anyone has any questions, we'll go to some questions, in 3 minutes time. My last question, because I've got a few. Any ocean species that change our perception on how the ocean works?
It's so huge. The one that always appeals to me is that in order to work out, sort of answer the question obliquely, in order to work out genetic questions, you try and study offspring and how they've changed genetically. Now, it becomes relatively difficult with whales that can live for 100 years. So what you want to do to understand populations better is you want to find a quicker marker that reproduces, has a shorter life cycle and reproduces more quickly. And what scientists turn to is the parasites, those callosities that you see on whales, those sort of barnacles on their sort of faces, and scientists study the genetics of parasite populations to get a better understanding of how the whale populations are formed. So, are you carrying does this whale population carry the same population of parasites? And if it doesn't, well, then they probably haven't come into contact with each other. These two populations have been separated for a long time, and you can work out whale populations, particularly where you're trying to reconstruct a whale population that has declined. And again, another thing, take comfort, our whale population is exploding. We don't know what to do with them. They're forming what do you call them, pods, I suppose, up on the west coast, and they're all over the place in False Bay as well. So the whales are certainly coming back.
That's wonderful. Beware kayakers, because in California, a humpback whale tried to eat a kayak the other day. Not tried, but opened its mouth and took in the kayak. Any questions from whoever's here? I've got a few more questions if no one has, but I thought, I'd open up to, if anyone has a question, please just unmute yourself and just ask away. So I'll give anyone, please unmute yourself and I will give you a chance to, if no one says anything, then I will say, okay, GMO fish. We have a question about GMO fish. Is there such a thing?
Yeah. So it's a lot depends on your perceptions of genetically modified organisms overall. I don't have strong feelings either way. To me, it's just another breeding activity, the same as my dog's a genetically modified organism. There are most of probably the most important genetically modified organism for fish is actually not a fish, but a pig. And he's called, I can't remember that, but basically a huge problem in estuarine systems is a particularly noxious form of pollution, which is over-fertilization. I mean, some rivers mustn't have too much fertilizer. Too much fertilizer means too much weed growth, and too much weed growth means the rivers get choked. So this wonder pig, or Frankenswine, as the opponents called, had mouse genes inserted into it, which would allow the pig to digest potassium and phosphorus, so that when its poo made its way into the ecosystem, it wouldn't cause weed growth and hyper nutrition of the estuarine system, which would have been a huge. Obviously, there was a huge opposition, and in certain areas, the sale and production of that pig has been restricted, which is a huge loss because it means that pig farming continues unrelented, but it's the more harmful pig farming. So. Opposition to GMO, there is a GMO salmon, which is also, and I can't remember what it's designed to do. There are huge concerns with the introduction of a different species into a particular area. So you've got a particular genetic makeup or gene pool in an area, and if you bring a fish from another area, you can radically interfere with that. So we're very cautious about allowing the introduction of species, and that's more wild species. But many of the GMO species or fish are sterile, so they offer the opportunity to raise a fish species that poses no threat to the gene pool. And again, because of the opposition to GMOs, it's likely that people will continue to farm with fish, but with fecund and not with sterile fish. The other issues with non-GMO fish, which aren't sterile, is that when you take a fish out of I go and pick 100 fish to be my broodstock, and I take them out of the system, and I exclude them from all the selective pressures that they're supposed to endure in nature. So they're supposed to all be eaten by birds or whatever else. And I just choose that small population. I've selected a very synthetic group, which I've allowed to expand synthetically and let their genes go into the ecosystem. Now, maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe I've chosen a group that were, let's say, which increased in size nicely, but they say were less resistant to disease. So people who are opposed to GMO will say, well, they wouldn't even look at that. It wouldn't occur to them. But people who come from a pro-GMO background would say, hey, I can remove all that stuff. My stuff can never enter the gene pool. You can farm safely with my stuff. So it's more, it's a bit of a Rorschach test on how you see GMOs, I think.
Okay, well, good. Thanks for that. I mean, that was definitely a comprehensive answer. We have one question here, and we'll try to do it in just 1 minute. The question is someone here is saying that they haven't eaten fish and meat for a long time, and are they helping the world in any way by not eating fish?
Personal opinion, and again, you're speaking to someone in the fishing industry, so take it from whence it comes. I always tell vegans that I could never live with myself if I had to live in a plant-based diet. I have to think about my children's future. And what I mean by that is, and I'm being a bit facetious, but when you eat a plant-based diet, what you're saying is your proteins are derived from an irrigated source. So you had to take a lot of water out of the rivers to irrigate your soya and your nuts and your beans and whatever else. And the abstraction of that water means that the flow of the hydraulics and estuaries is reduced, and fish species that are completely reliant on estuaries for their life cycle, like learfish and white Cape stumpnose and Natal stumpnose and grunter and all of them are under pressure because of loss of habitat. So the argument.
Finish up, Julian. We're going to get cut in about 20 seconds.
Okay. Okay, no, so I'm not convinced that it's necessarily the easiest way to go, or the best way to go. If you choose to eat from a sustainable fishery,
whoever was here acknowledged your experience and expertise. I mean, I think you're going to get 20 questions after this from everybody. Really informative and insightful. Thank you so much for sharing this knowledge, which not a lot of people in the world have. And it's going to be shared around this world, this video. So thank you. Luke, I'll also talk to you a little bit about your question. If anyone has any more questions, please ask me, and I will try to get an answer from Judian if he is so kind as to share more time with us.
Absolutely anytime. Always available.
God bless you, Judian, with healthy and happy and safe fishing for us and for the whole world. Thank you, Judian. Thank you so much.